warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello guys, welcome back to my video. My name Nuris Kalian Amira. Now I want to tell you about my family tree. I have grandparents. My grandfather, his name is Abdul Hamid. My grandmother, her name is Hajah Masliah. Okay, my grandparents have 7 children. The first child, her name is Yu. The second child, her name is Ani. The third child is Census. The fourth child is Imin. The fifth child is Titi. The sixth child is Fathur. And the seventh child, his name is Fauzan. Next, the first child is Iyu. Iyu married with Mr. Ahim, but they divorced, and they have 3 children: Miss Ita, Mr. Fadli, and Mr. Ikra. Miss Ita married with Mr. Yadi, and Mr. Fadli married with Mrs. Rahmi, and Ikra married with Mrs. Nana. The second child, Mrs. Annie, child is Mrs. Annie. Mrs. Annie married with Mr. Rusli, and they have 2 children. The first child is Mr. Nizar, and Mr. Nizar married with Mr. Nida. The second child is Mr. Nazar. Mr. Nazar married with Mrs. Emma. The Mrs. Census have 2 children. The first, Aat and Zata. Mrs. Census married with Mr. Cyril. The fourth child is Mrs. Imin. Mrs. Imin married with Mr. Jihun. And Mrs. Imin married with Mr. Jihun, and they have 3 children. The first, Mrs. Ami, and the second is Mr. Ali, and the third is Mr. Aglan. The fifth child is Mrs. Titi. We have Mrs. Titi married with Mr. Rusbandi, and they have 2 children. The first, Mr. Eki or Hayari, and the second child is me, Namira. And the sixth child is Fathur, and the seventh child is Mr. Fauzan. For watching this video,